Good evening and welcome to week 4 of the NFL season here on Commanders Gridiron. I'm your host, Steve Lockman. Thank you for tuning in and watching as always, regardless of the platform you're on. Tonight, we're going to be doing a little multitasking for those of you curious how tonight's show is going to go. We limited to 3 topics, short and sweet, bread and butter of what we do here at Commanders Gridiron, but it's also a juggling act as it's a daddy daycare night here at Commander's Gridiron. So you may hear a little extra coming from the side of the computer tonight, but we're going to keep going, try to give you guys a good 30 to 45 minute show tonight and cover all things Washington Commanders. So as we kind of seems to be a revolving door here at Commander's Gridiron, one of the things that always pops up in the news is new stadium stuff, right? And we're not going to go over all the location options and everything as far as that goes with the Washington Commanders. We've kind of harped on that for the last 3 to 4 weeks, but something that happened that was pretty important this week in the whole saga that helps different jurisdictions pull some leverage for getting the team back to their jurisdiction was particularly Washington, D.C. And, as we always discuss here and in the media, that there's a big push to get the team back to the original RFK complex. Well, this past week, the U.S. Representatives House of Oversight Committee voted on a piece of legislation, and it actually passed 31-9 in a bipartisan support, which we're going to get to here in a second. But what it does is it basically extended the lease that was about to expire in 10 years, which would mean that if the team were to go to RFK complex and start building a stadium, by the time they went there, they'd only have a lease for like 5 to 7 years, and then we'd have to go through the whole debacle again. So what this piece of legislation actually did was it gave approval from the feds, because it is a federal piece of property, RFK complex, to Washington, D.C. for a 99-year lease, as well as rezoning of that particular parcel of land from strictly sports entertainment to a mixed development use zoning. So what does that mean? They can put hotels, shopping, restaurants, stadium, all on one piece of property and not just the football stadium itself. So it's actually huge news. As we all know, DC doesn't have the greatest representation on the federal level. It's pretty much comes down to one individual, Representative Ellen Norton Holmes, as DC is a heavily Democratic city and area. What made this legislation kind of really big was that somewhere out of the blue, don't know if it was some behind the scenes negotiation or what, the primary sponsor of the bill, who was a House of Representatives legislator, was actually a Republican representative from Tennessee or Kentucky, last name of Comer, who's actually gone to odds before with the representative from DC. So to see this bipartisan support, it seems like a trivial, a small thing in the grand scheme of things, but to somebody that's tightly involved in the DC market and the Commanders network and their eye on things, this is actually pretty huge. So, this is one step closer to getting, the Washington Commanders that option of going back to the RFK complex. So, as always, we're excited to see what happens on the new stadium front, and, we'll kind of go from there. Hey, what's up? Dave checking in. Hello, sir. Sorry, but it had to be a shitty weekend for both of our teams, which we're going to get to here in a second. So as Paul says, yep, so it's going to be Jerry's World 2.0. but a Harris World Entertainment Center. Yeah, pretty much, right? And kind of one of the things we had a discussion at the firehouse the other day, where I work full time, that there were guys that were debating whether or not the stadium would be a dome or a traditional kind of like FedEx and RFK open. And as we kind of came to the conclusion, and we agreed to disagree, that if there's ever a chance to get into the Super Bowl rotation, as well as have events over late into the fall, over the winter, into the spring during the rainy season, that you're going to have at least a dome or a retractable roof, which I think is where the Commanders are going to go, regardless of, where they end up building that stadium. But as we switch gears, as we all know, coming off of week 3 in the NFL season here, Washington went into the game 2-0 against the Buffalo Bills. Whew, wow. What do we say, right? That it was a game that, in majority of people's eyes, whether it's media, fan base, Bills Mafia, other team opponents, guesses that Washington really was not picked to win this game, nor should they have won this game. Looking at it on paper, the Bills are one of those teams that are stacked, especially this year, and they're one of the pre-favorites in the AFC, along with Kansas City Bengals or Kansas City Chiefs and the Cincinnati Bengals. Sorry, to be Super Bowl contenders out of the AFC. So, on paper, we probably had no business winning this game, or even coming close to this game. However, we didn't necessarily think that it was going to be the crazy, game that it was, or that it came out to be. I guess the good thing that I can say is, even though we lost at home at FedEx Field on Alumni Weekend, 37-3 to the Buffalo Bills, at least we didn't get wiped out like the Denver Broncos did to the Miami Dolphins. So, but a loss is a loss nonetheless. And, and I got to agree, Paul, it's exactly what the Cardinals, with Dallas said, we have no business winning this game, but the Cardinals came out just as hard and tough as they did against the Commanders. And, it's any given Sunday. And at the end of the day, they were able to pull out the dub against the Cowboys. And, both of our teams now got to regroup going into the next weekend. The only problem is, as we're going to touch on later in the show, we have probably one of the hardest games of the season on our schedule, that we got to travel up 95, bypass Baltimore, and we're going to Lincoln Financial on Sunday afternoon. But there's a lot that happened in the Buffalo game this past weekend, right? Man, Dave, I hope we beat those Pigeons on Sunday. And we're gonna get into a crazy stat, because we got to look at last year when we went into Lincoln Financial and see what happened then. But we're gonna talk about that during the preview here coming up. So this past weekend, the weather wasn't necessarily in either team's favor. The remnants of Tropical Storm Ophelia was coming through the Mid-Atlantic and the DC area, giving a bunch of rain on Friday night, all day Saturday, and then basically kind of moving out on Sunday morning before kickoff. But it dropped about 2.5 to 3 inches of rain, depending on where you were, anywhere in the DMV, closer to the Eastern Shore, which definitely didn't make anything easier on the field conditions at all by any stretch of the imagination. So there's a lot of speculation about whether that was going to limit either team, more specifically the Bills, and their passing attack offense between Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs and Kincaid and Davis, that might be more of a land-based attack for both teams. And as far as the rushing, which we didn't see any shortage of that as well. But it was just kind of a sloppy field condition, a little bit of drizzle here and there, but weather was kind of non-existent, even though it was predicted to be a little bit more than what it was, right? So unfortunately, as we know, we lost the game 37-3. I did think it was going to be a little bit more competitive than what it was, especially on the scoreboard. And one of the things that it when we look at the big picture in the overall game, obviously turnovers killed us in this game. We ended up having 5 between 4 interceptions and a fumble by running back Antonio Gibson, who, we're going to talk about in a little bit, but he might be sealing his fate with multiple fumbles already this season, and we've only completed week 3. But overall, Sam Howell, who basically started his 4th game of his career, 1 last year and 3 now in the 2023 campaign, finished up with 19 of 29, 170 yards, 4 interceptions, as well as a QBR rating of 41.5, which obviously is pretty dismal thanks to the 4 interceptions, and going about a little over, actually just a shade over 50% for passing. Didn't really accumulate that many yards, but the 4 interceptions killed him. Now, when we take a look at the interceptions, there's a couple of things that you're going to have to look at, right? And, then you ask yourself, are there interceptions all on the quarterback? Is it a combination of batted balls? Was it tipped by the wide receiver? Was it, what exactly was it? So, and when we dissect the game and the way that it kind of went to Buffalo, Buffalo ended up scoring points off of turnovers, which, hey, in this day and age in the NFL, that's what you need to do as a good NFL team, right? If you're going to get that turnover, and the Bills are fortunate enough to get 5 of them from us, that, you got to score those points from turnovers. 1 turnover resulted in a field goal. 2 turnovers resulted in touchdowns. So right off the bat, off the top of my head, from memory, the Bills scored 17 of their 37 points, and it probably might even been 24 off of turnovers from the Washington Commanders. So, turnovers is what gives you the good field position. It helps demoralize the other team because they turn the ball over, and it definitely is a game changer for both teams in some aspect. Paul chimes in, Gibson is being undervalued in this offense, especially when Bieniemy loves quick motions. Yes and no, right? So one of the things that came out, it's actually kind of a neat stat. Here at Commander's Gridiron, we're all about stats, right? Is that they had, I know I'm trying to find my little sticky note here, right? Was that there was basically, I want to say 58 snaps of offense for the Commanders. And when they did that, AG, Antonio Gibson, was on the field for about, here we go. Found my Post-it note, right? All right. So week 3 snaps for the Washington Commanders. Offensively, they had 54 snaps. Defensively, they had 68. So the Buffalo Bills had 68 snaps on offense compared to the 54 of Washington Commanders. Okay. Of those 54 offensive snaps, when we look at AG basically being running back number 2, as well as like a third down back, kind of being Christian McCaffrey-ish, in the Washington system. A lot of people were asking, why didn't Brian Robinson run the ball more? Why didn't we run the ball more in general? Yada, yada, yada. Of the 54 snaps, Antonio Gibson had 33 of them. Brian Robinson had 20. Now, of those 33 snaps, was Antonio Gibson necessarily used in the most proper way? Maybe not. Having that second half fumble certainly didn't help his cause. In fact, I don't necessarily think he got into the game too much after the snap. He might have got in once or twice. But after that, it was pretty much a lot of B-Rob, at least in the game, whether or not we decided to run the ball. One of the things that came out, look, Sam Howell only attempted 29 pass attempts, so when you spread that around between McLaurin, Curtis Samuel, Dotson, Turner, the tight end, AG, B-Rob, the whole 9 yards. One of the things that we were kind of looking at going into this game was, the fact of whether Jahan Dotson was going to get a lot more targets and have an impact and be an impact player in the game. And unfortunately, he wasn't. He only had 4 targets, caught 2 balls, despite playing 94% of the offensive snaps. So, but part of that goes back to, the fact that Sam Howell, and goes back to the 4 interceptions and the 29 pass attempts. Sam Howell was sacked 9 times in this game. 9 times. Excuse my language, but that's freaking crazy, right? Unfortunately, that puts Commanders in negative exclusive territory, so to speak, right? So that the most sacked quarterback so far in the NFL at the end of week 3, unfortunately, is Sam Howell leading the way from Washington with 19 sacks. That's unheard of. That's absurd. And why are we leading that category that our quarterback is getting sacked 19 times? Just to kind of put it in perspective, we are 33% higher than the next closest teams. And when you think about bad quarterbacks and bad offensive teams, offensive lines, coming in at number 2 with 13 sacks so far this season is Justin Fields and Ryan Tannehill from Chicago and Nashville, respectively, right? So, obviously, the Bears are what they are. So we kind of expect, Justin Fields to get sacked. I didn't think that, the Tennessee Titans were that bad, that Ryan Tannehill is getting sacked already that many times this year, but apparently he is. Coming in at number 12 is Jones, Ritter, and Watson with 12 sacks each, which kind of isn't surprising looking at those three teams, and then rounding out the top 4 is Derek Carr and CJ Stroud from the Saints and the Texans with 11. But, Sam Howell has the dubious distinction of sitting there at the top at 19 sacks. So, then we got to break it down. I'm like, okay, so we suffered 9 sacks this week against the Buffalo Bills. The Buffalo Bills defense is that good. Okay. When you're going to be competing on paper and on the field to be a Super Bowl contender every year, your defense is going to show up and live like that. Right. So when, you look at defenses in the AFC, you're looking at Kansas City, you're looking at Cincinnati, you're looking at Buffalo, you're looking at Baltimore, and you can probably even throw in Pittsburgh to some extent for best defenses in the AFC. Even the New York Jets, even though the offense is below par, probably even worse than the Commanders, but they are what they are, right? So, when you're facing one of the best defenses in the league, and our first 2 teams were the Arizona Cardinals and the Denver Broncos, this is basically the first true test against an elite defense for our offense, and it showed, right? By the fact that we gave up 9 sacks. Basically, it looked like our offensive line didn't show up. They didn't get dressed. They didn't come out to play. They didn't warm up, and they didn't want to be there. What makes it even worse is, I don't put a whole lot of stock in Pro Football Focus grading and stuff, but they're usually on point with their grading and how they evaluate players and position groups and stuff like that. And unfortunately, one of the things that came out as a result of the 9 sacks was, people were looking at the evaluation of the offensive line for the Commanders this week and giving up those 9 sacks against the Buffalo Bills. And, good, bad, or indifferent, Sam Cosmi, who basically changed positions this year from where he was last year, was the highest rated lineman at 80.2%. And, Andrew Wiley, who came over from Kansas City last year because he was one of EB's boys, came in at 67.5 grading, which is still not good, maybe average. And the shitty part is it just dropped from there that, Leno, who basically looked like a bullfighter out there doing olays all day, had a 66.8. Nick Gates was horrendous at 46.7. And Sadiq Charles, I don't even know why you dressed and showed up, dude, because you had a 45.7. Paul makes some great points that, they couldn't handle Bernard at linebacker, between the stunts and the twists and the 2 sacks and the 2 tackles for loss. Bernard, I think, had one of the interceptions as well. Might even have had 2. Milano, their other linebacker, had a stellar game, especially from a run stop standpoint. So basically overall, the offensive line got a D- rating from Pro Football Focus for that grading of the Buffalo game. So what does that mean, or where did that come into? Was Sam Howell, every time he took the snap and went back to drop, there's a couple things, right? The line wasn't blocking for him, couldn't handle Buffalo's defense, and he was rushed over like 70% of the time every time he dropped back, which is absolutely horrendous. B, Sam Howell held onto the ball too long. And one of the things that was kind of interesting, and yes, it's a super young quarterback. He only made his fourth start since last season's week 18. So technically he is still a rookie quarterback. But, one of the things that, and I forget which DB it was, but they interviewed, somebody interviewed one of the Buffalo Bills defensive backs after the game. Was like, hey, how did you guys, get so many interceptions? How was your defense so dominant? And they said that, one of the times, in watching film so far in the first 2 weeks of the season, as well as going back to the Dallas game last year, was that, Sam Howell held on to the ball too long. And it was evident in the game on Sunday. He's got to do better at, when your line isn't going to help you, and that they're coming, and you're only going to have 2.5 to 3 seconds to get rid of the ball. And as Michael says, Sam Howell's not going to be able to basically be good against the Eagles pass rush. And that's something we're going to talk about here coming up in the second half of the show. But I think you're going to end up being right, and it's going to be one of the things that Philadelphia keys in on as they go into Sunday's game against the Washington Commanders. So, basically, it started out not too bad for the Commanders. Buffalo put a 10 spot up, was up 10-0, kicked a couple field goals as a result of turnovers and decent drives. It was 16-0 going into halftime. It kind of basically exploded in the second half from there. Third quarter, there was no scoring at all. And then the fourth quarter kind of just blew up, basically because of poor turnovers, field position for Buffalo. Buffalo got 21 in the fourth quarter. Washington kicked their only field goal for 3. So at least they didn't get the shutout and made 37-3. Now, the two big things that come out of that game was one, early in the first quarter, Ron Rivera elected to go for it on like 4th and 2. I'm not talking 4th and 1, even 4th and a half a yard. It was literally like a good 4 and 2, maybe even 4 and 3, closer to that point. But I think it was listed as like 4 and 1. But when you looked at the field, it was easily 2 yards, right? Me knowing that you're going into a hard game in some sloppy weather conditions, against Buffalo, an elite team in the NFL, you got to take the points. I don't know why Ron Rivera decided to tell EB, hey, let's draw up a play, let's go for it. So unfortunately, they got stopped. And, here we are now, so it was already, I think, 10-0. We're down at the 2-yard line. And, let's get 3 points. Let's walk away. Let's get some points on the board. And I think that was a confidence and morale killer from a fan perspective, not only for fans, but, for the guys in general, right? That early in the game, go for the points, walk off the field, come back on, kick off the ball, and try and let your defense do something. Defensive front didn't have any sacks this game, which was kind of surprising. Buffalo did a really good job at isolating the front four of Allen, Payne, Sweat, and Young. They had a couple of hurries. They had a couple of tackle for losses in the run game and stuff like that. But, they did a really good job at kind of isolating them. So then the problem was, they didn't have a really good pass rush. So Allen had a little bit more time to sit back there and figure out, what we were doing in the secondary, kind of what was going on. As Paul said, hey, where was Allen and Sweat? They're kind of non-existent, right? But then it kind of goes twofold that, yes, they weren't necessarily getting the best rush in the world to hurry Allen, had a couple batted balls, no sacks, whatever. But then the secondary wasn't doing anything spectacular in coverage to result in the front four getting a sack, right? So even if they don't have the best pass rush, if the secondary is tight, then Allen doesn't have anywhere to go. So even though he's got 5-6 seconds, the defensive front can still get a sack because he ain't got nowhere to throw the ball. Now, the one problem that we had, it kind of goes back to mobile quarterbacks. We know Josh Allen loves to run the ball. We know Josh Allen loves to use his feet if there's no options there, and he did it. I think his longest run was 23 yards, and he had a couple 10+ yard runs against us on Sunday. So, overall, it was just kind of a dismal game. But it kind of goes twofold. Half the sacks were on the offensive line, most definitely, and some of them were definitely on Sam Howell for holding the ball, not throwing it away. And then where the majority of his, at least 3 out of 4 of his interceptions came from, was trying to force things and make things happen that didn't necessarily need to be done. A team cannot afford to be throwing interceptions in the red zone. He had 2 of them. And we actually had a fumble down towards the red zone ourselves with AG. But, it's just stuff that as you're looking, you're like, man, this is just stuff that can't happen. So overall, it was just a dismal day for the Commanders. And, it's something that, hey, look, you watch the film, as Ron says, our offensive line didn't do very well. Gee, no shit. We'll watch the film. Sam's going to watch the film, and, we try to learn, pick up some new things. One of the things that came out after the game kind of right away was a lot of people talking about EB. And, I'll cut EB some slack because they were bitching and moaning because there wasn't more run attack. There wasn't a more balanced offense. And, Paul brings up a really good question that, what is the identity of this team running forward? And I'd be willing to bet or answer that question with, we don't know what the identity of this team really is yet, because we don't really know what we have in Sam Howell. So Sam Howell's looked really good, but, keep in mind that was week 1 against the Cardinals, week 2 against the Broncos. Here we go against an elite team in the Buffalo Bills, and he struggles but a lot of that was offensive line. But Sam Howell didn't do anything to help himself out either. So, what I think until we get to week 6, so another 3 games at least, you're going to see what this team really is. Are we a predominantly run team between B-Rob and AG that can then, develop the play action and all of the misdirection and motions off of that to open up the passing offense for Sam Howell under EB? Or are we going to be predominantly a passing team like they were in Kansas City with a little bit of run here and there to try and balance it out that way? I think you still need to give a couple more games to Sam Howell to figure out what exactly we're going to have in him to see what we're going to be able to do. But there were a lot of fans and even, DC media that were like, hey, EB completely abandoned the run. Well, yes and no. I mean, when you're down, 23-0, and the run game, even though B-Rob had some good runs here and there, 8, 10, 7, yards a clip. There were also a lot of times where he was getting stuffed at the line of scrimmage. He was tackled for loss in the backfield. AG was tackled for loss in the backfield. And people are like, why didn't we just keep running the ball to help open up the offense? Well, when you're not consistently getting that 4 yards a clip, I would rather at least take the pass attempts, barring Sam Howell trying to force things, resulting in turnovers, than I would going 3 and out, rushing the ball 2 out of 3 times, and an incomplete pass, and then holy shit, we're punting the ball. We had some really good drives, but unfortunately, we shot ourselves in the foot and ended up in turnovers. So we had like 4 or 5 really good drives, over 80 yards plus, that unfortunately, interception, punt, AG turnover with the fumble, and Paul's absolutely right. It's a learning curve, just like the Steelers are, with Kenny Pickett, and the fact that, the Steelers fans were calling for his head before, the game this past week. And, holy shit, they went and won, and everybody's like, hey, Kenny looks a lot better. So I agree. We just got to give Sam some time, give EB some time. Hopefully the offensive line can figure out what the hell they're doing. And we will kind of go from there, right? And see what happens. So, but overall, wasn't a bad, for as crappy of a day as it was. It's, as they say, it's, you learn from this week and on to the next one. But before we talk about the Eagles game here in week 4, let's hit our sponsors real quick here at Out of the Box Sports Entertainment. And the first one up is Attorney Big Al. That's Jason Fine, also known as Attorney Big Al, at 1-800-HURT-123 for all of your motor vehicle accidents, slip and falls, workman's comp, personal injury claims. He has 3 office locations in Philadelphia, Cherry Hill, New Jersey, and Pittsburgh, PA. So for all of your legal needs, contact Attorney Big Al, Jason Fine, at 1-800-HURT-123. Next up, we got Dugout Mugs. Use promo code OOTBSports20 at dugoutmugs.com for all of your baseball needs, as well as drinking pleasures, so to speak. With the baseball season winding down here, and go O's as they clinch the AL East, hopefully, fingers crossed. Get your Dugout mug, get it engraved, get it customized with your logo. Enjoy that fresh cold beverage inside of there. They also make shot glasses as well. These are actually pretty cool items. They're actually, some of them are actually used baseball bats that they basically repurpose and put the team's logo or your logo on it. So jump on to Dugout Mugs. Use that promo code OOTBSports20 for your 20% off discount at dugoutmugs.com. Last but not least, Monkey Coffee with 3 new blends: Sumatran Blend, the toasted coconut rum, and the bourbon chocolate chip. Use promo code OOTBSports at monkeycultcoffee.com. We are actually going to try and have a Monkey Cult Coffee player of the week this week, but since our game was so shitty and the team played crappy, we weren't able to do that. So hopefully next week we will have a Monkey Cult Coffee player of the week for the Commanders. But jump on there, get your coffee flavors, get your cups, get your apparel as well, and use that promo code OOTBSports at monkeycultcoffee.com. All right, jumping back into the second half of the show, and we'll see how long we can talk about the preview here coming up. Little one's doing good. She's passed out next to me. I don't know if that's from me talking so much or just from the fact that she's tired, so we'll see what happens. But as we said, going into week 4, the Washington Commanders going in at 2-1 against the Philadelphia Eagles at 3-0. It's going to be at Lincoln Financial Field up in Philly, which is always a hard place to play. However, we should keep in mind that last season, I think it was 12-0 or 11-0 as the Eagles came in their undefeated season. Washington said, hey, we're going to go up to Lincoln Financial. We're going to give you guys the big FU and basically cancel your perfect season, and pulled out the victory, like 32-24, 34 something to 21 to the Eagles. Now, the problem is I don't think we are the same team as last year. Eagles aren't even the same team as last year, and our offensive line certainly isn't even anywhere close to what it was last year. So a lot of stuff to look at in the preview coming up for this week. However, let's look at last night real quick. The Eagles pulled off a victory 25-11 against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And as much as it started out as a close game in that Monday night game last night, Eagles kind of do what they do and, had some big plays here and there. And, as Eileen says, yep, it was a tough loss. I wanted Tampa Bay to win last night, but kind of in the back of my head, like I knew that, hey, look, Philly's the better team. They should be winning this game against Tampa Bay last night. So, what does that come out to? Jalen Hurts did Jalen Hurts stuff, went 23 for 37 with 277 yards and a touchdown. However, he did throw 2 interceptions last night. And that's going to be key as we kind of look to, the preview here next week against the Washington Commanders. The Eagles defense did what they did. They held Baker Mayfield to 15 out of 25 for 146 yards, one touchdown and one interception. That's what the Eagles do, right? Eagles produce those turnovers on that great defense that helps them and their prolific offense. Put those points on the board. So, one of the things that the Eagles have also been good at so far this year that I think, Washington's definitely going to have to address is that rushing game of the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, I know that traditionally so far this year, Sirianni has been doing a running back by committee. However, last night, once again, DeAndre Swift, who was traded from the Detroit Lions to the Philadelphia Eagles in the offseason, had 16 carries for 130 yards last night. I would like to think that our defense is better than Tampa Bay's, but there's definitely a lot of similarities between Tampa Bay's defense and ours. So, hopefully we can limit the rushing and not give up 130 yards to DeAndre Swift and company, even more than that, actually, for, basically what the Eagles can do. The Eagles have a prolific air attack as well, and AJ Brown led that assault last night with 9 receptions for 131 yards. As Paul says, I see a difference with Hurts. If you keep him in the pocket with pressure, he's different, but needs to put pressure on it, right? And obviously puts that, but that running game with Swift is something that definitely carries and needs attention by defense. And that kind of takes me back to one of the things that I think, if the Washington defense can do A, what they did last year, and then B, what they've been doing so far this year up until quasi some of the Buffalo game, if they can put pressure on Hurts, let's be honest, the Eagles have, let's give them credit where the credit is due, that they have one of the best offensive lines in football. I'm not a big Eagles fan by any stretch of the imagination, but, I am a Jason Kelce fan. And that dude is, in his 12th or 13th season, doing some great things over there in Philly, leading that attack on the offensive line. So for Sweat and Young and Payne and Allen, they definitely have their work cut out for them next week in Philadelphia against that, that stout offensive Eagles offensive line. But I feel that they can make, if they scheme right and put the pressure on, that they can do some things that they've been able to do the first 2 weeks of this season. That'll hopefully be a difference maker for them. And a lot of that is, when you look at the 2 interceptions last night that Hurts had, one was trying to force a ball. Basically, he had no business throwing the ball where he did. And it got picked off. Second one, I don't think he even saw the guy come out and make the intercept, or come across to make the interception and jump on the route. So it'll be interesting to see if we can kind of cause some disruptions to Hurts and his tempo, and make him feel a little hurried back there, that he does throw some interceptions. I don't really see the Eagles fumbling a whole lot, so I don't know if we're going to be able to do much on that end as well. You're absolutely right. Kendall Fuller is going to have his hands full this week. Our entire secondary is going to have their hands full, and I honestly feel that Johnson and Sirianni are going to focus on the rookie Forbes. In the cornerback. Now it'll be interesting to see how many snaps he plays. He only played 41% of the defensive snaps last week against Buffalo, who was, a top tier offensive, production unit. So, he's going to play the same, going to play a little bit more. I don't know, but yes, Fuller, Cam Curl, Benjamin St. Juice, and Forbes and all those guys are going to have their hands full. You can't really isolate one guy on Philly's offense, because they're going to turn around and they have somebody, right there that's going to pick up the slack and kill you in another way as well, right? So if we try to take it, isolate or do something with Antonio Brown, Devontae Smith is going to be there. if we try to take out Smith, then, AJ Brown's going to have a good game. Oh, by the way, they got, a good tight end in Dallas Goedert. Swift out of the backfield, all this other stuff. So, they have a lot of combinations that can be very dangerous for us. So it'll be interesting. One of the other things that's going to be a super interesting point to watch in this upcoming game is our linebackers, right? As Paul says, he loves watching Cody Barton play. He's fundamentally sound. And that's one of the reasons that they brought him in this season on the free agent market to be linebacker was he's veteranly, if that's even a word, experience. He played all of his years in Seattle under that great defense up there with Pete Carroll and the Legion of Doom, right? And, knowing that year 2, year 3, I guess it's year 3 now, Jamin Davis, the linebacker that we drafted out of Kentucky, isn't quite up to where we want him to be from a team's perspective, even fan perspective as well, that he can provide that mentorship, that leadership on the field, signal caller-esque linebacker. He's not the fastest guy in the world, but does what he needs to do to get things done and make those plays. But between Jamin Davis and Cody Barton, because we predominantly run only 2 linebackers at a time, it'll be interesting to see how we handle that with the offensive packages that Philly puts out on the field between their wide receivers, Dallas Goedert, DeAndre Swift out of the backfield, running back by committee, yada, yada, yada. So it'll definitely be interesting to see how that manifests throughout the week. Dan Quinn said he was one of the leaders in the linebacker room for the Legion of Boom when he was the coach. Yep, you're right. And like I said, I think, Ron Rivera being a defensive-minded coach, playing linebacker himself, saw that in Cody Barton, said, hey, let's bring you in, help develop and materialize Jamin Davis into the linebacker that he can be, and let's see what you guys can do. So, offensively, that's kind of defensively on the ball. Look, the Eagles are going to score their points. It's just a matter of how much we can limit them to scoring points. I think that Washington can do a really good job at not making this a complete blowout, probably even closer than the Buffalo game was. But, look, the Eagles are still really stout and they're going to score their points. But it's just a matter of, trying to keep it close, trying to keep it respectable, not getting shut out, and kind of, just another peg on the learning curve, right? The Eagles are heavily favored, between San Francisco and Dallas to be the top NFC teams to go, to contend for the Super Bowl this year. And it's something that, I don't necessarily disagree with, right? The Eagles are loaded. They show it. They play like it on both sides, actually in all 3 facets of the ball, even though they've lost both coordinators this year, which is, definitely a tribute to them and their program over there in Philly. Us, as far as offensively, I would definitely like to see some improvement and production after the week we had against Buffalo at FedEx Field. Our offensive line definitely has to figure something out. Even if the offensive line can play 50% better than what they did against Buffalo, we'll have a fighting chance against Philly. If they can play like they did against the Broncos, especially in the second half, we'll be able to, and part of it, wants me to say that we still had good to decent drives this past Sunday. It just resulted in turnovers, resulted in interceptions, resulted in the fumble. So we definitely had our opportunities to possibly score points against Buffalo, even though we may not have won the game. It probably would have been a lot closer than 37-3. Could have been, 37-20 or 37-24 or whatever, which is kind of where I see this game with Philadelphia, right? Philadelphia is going to get their 30 points. There's no doubt about it. I would like to say that I would like to think that the Commanders could at least get 17 on the board against Philly. Is Joey Sly going to have a busy day? Yeah. It's, he's probably going to have a couple field goals. Our touchdowns may only be 1 or 2 for the game because Philly's defense is that good. We can't take that away from them. But, hey, as as they say it out of the box sports there. I'd love to see the scores and the predictions of what the Eagles are going to do. Look, I would love to have my team go up there in Philly and beat the Eagles again this week, but unfortunately, I just don't see it happening, right? And like I said, I think the Eagles are going to get their points. They're going to score at least 30. And I wouldn't be surprised if the Eagles put up, 35. I'm going to say like 35-17, right? I feel confident that we can bounce back enough from the Buffalo loss to at least get 17 points this week against the Eagles. But the Eagles are just going to be too tough early in the season for us, for where we are right now as a team, and especially as an offensive unit. That I don't know that we're going to be able to match up as well as I'd like them to pull out the victory. And I know it'll probably grow between now and Sunday, but right now we're 7.5-point underdogs. At least we were last night. I didn't check it today going into the show tonight. But the betting lines had the Eagles favored at 7.5. Typically, three out of that 7.5 is just for home field advantage. So, like I said, I wouldn't be surprised if that grows to at least 10 or 12 by the end of the week, depending on injury reports and kind of what happens and where things go, especially with the Eagles being at home. But we'll see what happens. As always, we will probably end up after this week going 2-2 or ending up being 2-2 after week 4. As my buddy Joe Sullivan says, I thought you guys would cover. Surprised. Man, I'll tell you what. It's hard, right? If we would have had a better outing against Buffalo, especially more points and fewer turnovers, then I would probably jump on your side and say that we could probably cover that, right? But with the offense kind of in flux right now and not really being quite established with EB yet, I'm not 100% sure that we're going to cover that. Maybe we will. I don't know. It'll certainly be interesting that, but like I said, I think the Eagles offense is going to be too dominant for us. As much as I love my defense, and this is probably going to be the one shitty game against us. If our offensive line doesn't figure it out, it's going to be a long day for them, and it's going to be a great day for the Eagles defense as well. Tressway will probably be our team MVP again, and all the punting that he does. But we'll go from there. But as we look forward to the game next week, as there's 215 boys say, just beat them damn birds. I would love to say we could do that. It would definitely be an upset if we do. Unfortunately, I just don't see it happening. I had the distinct honor and opportunity tomorrow night. For those of you watching tonight, jump on Philly Press Box Radio tomorrow night, 7 o'clock. I'll be on there with my good friend Bill Furman and his partner Chet, previewing this game as well for those guys for about the first 10, 15 minutes as we talk Commanders versus Eagles at Lincoln Financial Field. So if you're free and want to jump on and watch that, or even the first segment or the whole show, love to have you on. I'll be jumping over there at Philly Press Box Radio with those gentlemen to talk about the upcoming game. Next week, hopefully we will be able to go a little bit longer. Might be some more off the field news. As there's always drama with Philly, on and off the field. So we'll see what happens. We'll also be previewing the next week's game that the DC Commanders do in I was going to say which I had to look at the start time. It's actually the Thursday night game against the Chicago Bears. Wow, which could be, should be a W, could be a trap game. Who knows? Short week. The Bears are the Bears, right? Even probably worse than the Arizona Cardinals and the Denver Broncos for that matter. But, first let's get to Philadelphia. Let's see what Philadelphia has to offer. Let's put up a good showing against Philadelphia. And, hey, like I said, we may end up losing. I'm perfectly okay with that. We're not expected to win, but let's be competitive, let's make it respectable and not get shut out and try and keep it close. But before we leave tonight, just as a quick reminder about our shows here on the network, we got something for everybody here at Out of the Box Sports Entertainment. There's a show for each NFC East team. Just got to find the night. We got great hosts for each of those shows. We have a gaming show if you're into that as well. Thursday nights, we have our weekly Pick'em show followed by the NFC East War Room. Basically, a bunch of previews for each NFC East team as well as some trash talking going down. Saturday, we got the Notre Dame podcast, usually pregame, postgame shows. Man, what a tough loss this past weekend against Ohio State. I'm not a big Notre Dame fan, but I'm an anti-Ohio State fan. So I got to say that I was rooting for the old Irish on Saturday night, and that was a heartbreaker. Probably gave everybody in the country a coronary watching that game. But we got a bunch of other shows as well. Just find something that works for you and what you're looking for. We got the College Football Frenzy, the old school shows, the Atomic Drop podcast. We got, like I said, we have the teams for the NFC East and them 215 boys, the Bat Cave, the Big Blue Power Hour, the Philly Fire or the Philly Flare, and the Sully Squad. And extra innings coming up tonight as well at 8:30. Those guys will be talking everything baseball as the baseball season winds down and we get ready for the playoffs. Definitely looking to be a pretty awesome last week and a half here of baseball as we go into the postseason. But with that being said, we're going to sign off for tonight. Somebody decided to wake up, start getting a little vocal. Hey, man, I bet it was hard to do that post-game show after that Irish loss. I might even have had to disguise myself or do it in the dark after that game. But, hey, college football, it is what it is. So with that being said, we'll be looking forward to next week's show as we recap the Philadelphia game and look forward to the Thursday night Bears game. And everyone have a good evening and good night.